Eating meat, saturated fat, butter, lard, in reality has very little effect on your metabolic health. That conclusion from a study published in October of 2023 showing substitution of polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fatty acids for saturated fatty acids had really no effect on glucose tolerance or beta cell function of the pancreas. Here's a quote from Dr. Benjamin Bickman on October 6, 2023 on Twitter. Despite all the fury against saturated fat among anti-meat advocates, the actual clinical evidence suggesting it's a problem is tremendously weak, meaning absent. Here's the study, the impact of saturated compared to unsaturated dietary fat on insulin sensitivity, pancreatic beta cell function, and glucose tolerance. And here's the link. Maintaining a healthy diet is considered a cornerstone for the reduction of morbidity and mortality. And of course, the fight is, what's a healthy diet? If you combine years of life lost due to early death and years of life living with a disability, the leading metric in the United States from 1990 to 2010 was dietary composition regarding disability-adjusted life years. This study was a meta-analysis trying to determine the effects of different dietary fats on your health. And it's very difficult to do long-term nutritional research. I mean, you can't really tell that somebody's following a dietary guideline unless, I guess, you put them in an institution and watch them 24 hours a day. So this study looked at 30 studies that were culled from over 6,000 studies that were written on nutrition and dietary fat intake up to January of 2023. We've heard for 50 years to reduce our saturated fat intake to less than 10% of our calories, to reduce our cholesterol and reduce our low-density lipoprotein levels, presumably to reduce our risk of fatal heart attack and early death. That is based on the unproven conclusion that cholesterol and low-density lipoprotein is pretty much the sole indicator of your risk for cardiovascular disease, heart attack, and heart attack death. It's been suggested to replace saturated fat with monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. Of course, if you're going to reduce your fat intake, you have to replace those calories with something, and they have finally figured out that replacing those with carbohydrates is not helpful at all. Since we've had an explosion of insulin resistance, weight gain, and type 2 diabetes, these researchers looked at studies with the impact of the different fats, unsaturated and saturated, on insulin resistance markers, glucose tolerance testing, and of course, diabetes' biggest risk factor is the development of heart disease. Of the 6,355 records identified, 30 met their criteria. With a mean age of 42 years, there were 1,586 participants in those 30 studies, and the median duration of the nutritional intervention was 5 weeks. Their conclusion was that replacing saturated fatty acids with polyunsaturated fatty acids had no effect on islet cell function or insulin resistance and glucose tolerance. They could not meet statistical significance with replacing saturated fats with monounsaturated fats. Then, to make it even more confusing, a reduction in saturated fat will reduce cardiovascular events by 21%, but has no effect on all-cause mortality or non-fatal heart attacks. And that's from this study published in 2020. Here's the link. In this 2020 study, they looked at 15 randomized clinical trials and determined that reduction in saturated fat intake reduced cardiovascular events. And that held true for polyunsaturated fats and still inconclusive for monounsaturated fats. There were no harmful effects of reducing saturated fat intake, but from their results, it says there was little or no effect of reducing saturated fats on non-fatal myocardial infarction rates, but effects on total myocardial infarction, both fatal and non-fatal, stroke, and coronary heart disease events, fatal or non-fatal, were unclear, or the evidence was of very low quality. There was little to no effect on cancer mortality, cancer diagnoses, diabetes diagnoses, HDL, high-density lipoprotein levels, serum triglycerides or blood pressure, and small reductions in weight, serum total cholesterol, low-density lipoprotein, and body mass index. So go ahead and eat your meat. Then you can have your pudding, or not. Have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Bye.